My name is Matt Pugliese. I live in Old Saybrook. With my wife and my two daughters. I'm 36 years old. I have spent my professional career in the arts, specifically the theater. So I began my career at the Iverton Playhouse, and after several years of working there, I moved on to the Oddfellows Playhouse Children's Theater up in Middletown, where I was the executive director for about 6 years, and then went to Connecticut Repertory Theater, the professional theater up at the University of Connecticut, where I'm the managing director and the executive producer of the Nutmeg Summer Series right now.
And why did you decide to make a run for office? What was the thought process motivated you to?
Well, I've always felt that the arts are very much about bringing community together. It's about looking at issues in the community and having a dialogue. So theater and democracy both started in the same city at the same time. And we used to have one person stand on stage and speak to an audience of people. And then Thespis put two people on stage, and they turned and they talked to each other, and they had a dialogue, and they had conflicting points of view, and that provoked a reaction in the audience. And so theater is about presenting conflicting points of view and bringing an audience together, bringing a community together. And so my entire career has been about working with people, about looking at issues in the community and examining them. And so I think in some ways that way, going into politics, into government, is a natural extension of the work that I've been doing as an artist over the last 15 years. But personally, I've just been frustrated with the partisan gridlock that we have. I have my master's in public administration. I think that government's job is to deliver service for the community, and we need to have better leaders. I love Connecticut. I've loved growing up in Connecticut. I want to raise my daughters here in Connecticut, and so I really care about getting our state moving in the right direction and having the leaders that are going to go up there, that are going to communicate, collaborate, build consensus, reach across party lines, and have progress for our state.
One of the big issues we're concentrating on as a newspaper and editorially is the continuing fiscal problems for the state. Each year it seems to get to the budget time, and yet again the state is facing a big deficit. There's a scramble to how to plug those holes, what can be cut, what tax can be raised. We seem to be in this kind of perpetual fiscal crisis. What thoughts might you bring going to Hartford when you look at that persistent problem and how it might be addressed?
So we only have a half hour, right? So I've spent my career on the nonprofit side, and we have to deliver service to the community at really tight budgets. So we have to be accountable. We have to have a fiduciary responsibility. We have to be transparent. And the nonprofit sector, we squeeze everything we can out of every penny to maximize service delivery. So when I think about the budget at the state level, that's the style of leadership that we need. How are we going to maximize what we are doing with our revenues to deliver the most effective service for the community? I think a lot of it is strategy. What are our strategic priorities, both for short-term strategy and long-term strategy? How are we going to grow Connecticut's economy? I don't want to go and raise taxes, but we have a revenue problem in the state, and we have a spending problem. So we have to address both of them simultaneously. So we have to look at what are we going to do to grow Connecticut's economy, both in the short term and the long term, and what are we going to do to go through and make strategic choices on how we can cut spending without exacerbating problems that we have within the community.
Mm-hmm. Would you, on labor issues, do you think there has to be savings found there, or not on the labor side?
Well, so I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that I think you're starting to get into the state employee and teacher pension benefits.
Well, that's certainly.
In a way, I know that over the last 8 years, we have worked to reduce the state workforce with early retirements and combining departments, and so we have to be really careful, I think, in terms of reducing the state workforce so much that we're not able to effectively deliver service. I know everybody, when we go into the DMV and we have to deal with long lines and waits, that's a point where everybody feels like, do we have people that are working for us and effectively doing their jobs? And how much of it is staffing issues, in different areas. So we want to be careful that we don't cut the workforce too much that we're not able to effectively deliver service. On the other side, though, we need to be realistic about how we're going to go forward. Can you ask the question again, because I feel like there's a second part to it that I'm leaving out.
You raised certainly the issue of the pension obligations are a big drag on the budget financially, but would be potentially would you look to more labor concessions? That's been raised, as a possibility. Somewhere the state, you would think either you raise taxes or you cut spending, which usually means to some extent finding labor savings, because that's the biggest cost, or some combination thereof. So I guess I'm trying to understand the candidates, if they get up to Hartford, what will they be open to? What they think would be the wrong direction as far as that balance of trying to get our fiscal house in order.
Gotcha. Okay, so, one thing that I think is important, in the short term, we have to get control of the teacher pension benefits. So I would be in favor of refinancing those so that we can reduce the short-term payment in terms of what a big chunk of our cash flow that is, and extend that out so we can have a better sense of management in the short term. I think that we need to actually commit the funds towards paying down our unfunded pension benefits. That's something that hasn't been done over the last 30, 40 years by people on both sides. So making sure that we're committing the funds to do that, because we have made promises. We have contracts, and those need to be honored. There's a moral responsibility to doing that. Right now, the standing agreements, the contracts, can't be reopened for negotiation until 2027 unless both sides are willing to sit down and do that. So I think that when I see other people say we should just start to renegotiate these, we're going to get into, if we're doing that unilaterally, then we're going to end up getting into extra legal costs and arguments. From my own personal work experience, I run an organization right now where I have members of 5 different unions working on my team. 3 of them are state employee unions. 2 of them are national unions for actors and directors and choreographers. When we have a small issue at the theater, a show gets canceled because of snow and we need to reschedule, there's not a solution to doing that that's going to make the membership of each union happy. So we have to sit down as a group and we have to have a conversation, and we have to make sure that we're thinking about what it is that we're trying to do, what the problem is that we're solving, and it ultimately comes down to who we're serving, which is our audience. And so that's the style of leadership that I bring when I'm working with labor and trying to find solutions.
Another hot topic in this election is the tolls, whether tolls is the best way to try to raise the revenues necessary to begin addressing our transportation problems. Everyone seems to agree that there is a problem. Recent study, 300 deficient bridges. Many arguing some of the roads need widening. There's a debate how much money should be invested in roads as opposed to mass transit. But however they feel about it, there's general consensus more it's going to be necessary to have a first-class transportation system. What's the best way to raise the revenues? What would you go to Hartford being willing to look at?
So I am in favor of having safe roads and bridges and a strong first-class transportation system, because I think that's critically linked to us having a growing, successful economy. I drive 2 hours a day on 95 and 395 to work, and I see people from New York and from Massachusetts and Rhode Island driving on our roads for free. And we have 76% approximately roads and bridges in Connecticut have a C rating or lower. So we need to do something about improving them, and we need to find revenue to do that. And 48 out of 50 states in the the country have some sort of tolling. Connecticut's the only state on the eastern seaboard that doesn't have any tolling. And so I would like to look at making sure that we do tolling in a way that it would be electronic, so that there's not additional toll booths and, causing traffic issues, and that we're doing it in a way that is going to bring in additional revenue, because I would rather have people from out of state paying 40% of those tolls than not paying anything at all. And I think that there are ways to look at either tax rebates or discounts for in-state residents so that it is not a regressive impact on people in Connecticut, and that there's a smart way to do that.
How do you view the talk on the other side of phasing out our income tax as a way of generating economic growth, going back to a time we had no income tax?
I mean, it's appealing for sure, the idea of not having an income tax. The struggle for me is how quickly we can do that and where we're going to make up that revenue, because we already have a revenue problem. And so when I look at phasing out the income tax, I wonder what we're going to do in terms of cutting service and how that's going to impact you and me and our neighbors. And I don't think that that's something that we can do overnight.
Kim, you got something?
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about the state budget. I wondered if you could kind of talk about how you would address the economy for the 23rd district specifically. Do you think there's any changes need to be made to, spur economic development, or any special needs for that district?
Yeah, well, I think transportation is really important in our district. The 23rd district sits kind of at the edge of the Shoreline East train line, and there is work that can be done to grow the infrastructure there for Shoreline East and make it a more viable commuter rail line than people that I talk to really feel like it is. I think that another major piece of our economy is tourism. We're on the shoreline. Our population, quadruples in the summertime, and arts, culture, tourism is the third largest sector of Connecticut's economy, and the state has not done anything since it cut arts and culture and tourism funding in 2008 to restore it. Every state in the country cut its arts and culture budget in 2008 during the recession, but 49 out of 50 states have restored that funding to pre-recession levels because of the economic return in investing in culture and tourism. So especially in the 23rd, it's one of the largest sectors I know of my own town, Old Saybrook's economy, and I think that there's real opportunities there to grow our economy.
Just following up on that, do you think the economic importance of the arts and cultural institutions is sort of undervalued when it comes time to finding savings and where to direct state aid? That's often a target.
Yes.
People say, well, that's not a necessity.
Yeah, yes. I'm very biased from my 15-year career in the arts because every time that Connecticut has been facing a deficit, it's one of the first things that comes up. Let's just slash the culture and tourism budget, or let's merge culture and tourism in with economic and community development, and really have less of a seat at the table in terms of sitting down and planning and looking at the real impact. And every time that arts organizations bring forward numbers and studies that they've done that on economic impact, we feel as a sector that they're really pushed aside and we're dismissed as artists. But again, in the most recent economic community development report that the state did in 2015, arts and culture and tourism is the third largest sector of our economy. And so that's something that we really can't ignore, and we really should be looking at how we can grow, because the first thing everybody says when they talk about Connecticut is the beauty of our shoreline and the great location we have sitting between New York and Boston. And we have all here on the shoreline seen what traffic is like in the summer on 95, so we know we have the audience that's here and an opportunity to grow there.
Jim, follow up?
And do you think there's anything that should be done to make the state more affordable, or the 23rd district more affordable? Do you have any?
More affordable.
We're talking about housing affordability?
Well, housing and any other kind of...
Well, I mean, so a couple of things that are really important to me in terms of affordability and how I think that we can actually work to grow our economy to get us moving in the right direction is focusing on policies that are really going to support the hardworking families in our district. And those things are making sure that we have affordable housing. And affordable housing is, set at a percentage of the median housing price for each community. And making sure that we have affordable housing is going to be supporting our teachers, our hairdressers, our firefighters, our young college graduates that are looking to put down their roots and live here in Connecticut. So having those people here in our community is really important. Making sure that we can ensure access to affordable health care is huge. Not only is it huge for the private citizen, but when I was running Oddfellows Playhouse and we were providing healthcare benefits to a small staff, it's such a volatile cost for a small business to have to figure out how to provide. And that really impacts not only its ability to retain employees, but be competitive in terms of attracting employees and to survive. So if we want to focus on families and we want to focus on our small businesses, affordable health care is huge. And then the last piece is paid family leave. Connecticut's up to being I believe, the oldest average population in a state in the country. And when I went and sat down with UConn students and said, what is it going to take to keep you here when you graduate? One of the first things that they said was paid family leave. Right now, New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, by the end of 2019, will all have paid family leave systems in place. And that's not only for when you're first starting your family, that's also for if suddenly a spouse takes ill, a parent gets ill at some point in life. So it's helping everybody that would be paying into the system. But for me, that's a way to support people when they're planning for the unplanned. And it's also about regional competitiveness for Connecticut as an environment.
Who would be responsible for paying that leave? Would it be the employer? Would it be a pool of money? How would you approach it?
Right now, it would the proposal that had been brought forward was, I believe, to have every individual paying into that policy a small percentage, not on the small business or on the employer.
Why do you think that's preferable? And is it another tax that people might object to?
Well, for sure, it's another tax that people might object to. I think that that is a possibility, but I think that it's much more fair when everybody is paying something into it rather than pushing that burden onto small businesses. I know myself that we weren't able to provide at Oddfellows, with a staff of 8, any paid leave benefits. So when people had a child, when I had my own child, I didn't get a paid leave. I could take any accrued vacation or sick time, but I went to work the day after my daughter was born because I couldn't afford to take the time off. I didn't have accrued vacation. So we really need to find ways that are going to support families. If your spouse or your parent was suddenly to take ill, you don't necessarily have the ability to plan for that. And a small business doesn't have the ability to provide that leave. And then they have to have the employee go out on unpaid leave, which straps that business with that extra work, and they're not able to replace that person on a temporary basis either. So I think that that's the most fair way to implement it, and it's something that right now I might feel like I'm not using it, but it's like insurance. When you do need it, you're going to be grateful that you have it.
How about the $15 minimum wage? Where do you stand on that proposal?
I heard yesterday from a candidate that a study had actually been done, and in Connecticut we would actually need something closer to a $24 minimum wage for people to be able to live. And so I'm actually surprised because I think that means it's even more important that we move towards a better living wage. It is frankly, sickening to me that we have families that live here in our community that are working more than one job and not able to make ends meet. We have, a very high population in our communities that are the Alice population, that people that are, one kind of accident or missed payment away from, severe, financial crisis. And we need to be supporting our working class.
But that small business, and you've been involved with small business, might might look at that and say, paying that higher salary, I have a lot of untrained, unskilled workers. I might have team workers that that's going to push me over the edge as far as profitability, or it might mean that I have to let someone go and operate with a smaller staff. I'm going to have to pay this higher minimum wage. So what do you say to the pushback you get from some small business people that they're concerned about that?
Well, I think, on the higher level, every time that we've seen an increase in the minimum wage, we've also seen a corresponding decrease in the unemployment rate. And so that kind of is a contradiction to that argument. I think that something that's really important is when you have your staff working, are you getting the most out of them if they're worried about going to their next job to work another 10 hours? If they're not putting in 100% for you because they're needing to go work somewhere else as well, you're not necessarily getting the most you can out of your employees.
Can anything or should anything be done about large retailers who have a lot of part-time workers that don't qualify for benefits and have lower salaries, in the state sort of becomes the subsidy of that? They provide the food stamps, they perhaps qualify for insurance, help from the state, and sort of subsidize very successful companies in some cases. Is there anything you think the state should be doing in those situations?
I think that, for sure that we should be having conversations about that, because what those large successful companies are doing are shifting that burden onto the state and onto the taxpayers.
So you're not ready to offer a solution, but it's...
I'm not ready to offer a solution, but I see in it a problem that is being put onto the taxpayers, and for sure an inequity that needs to be addressed.
Your towns are affluent, would be my impression of them. They have good schools. Not every community has good schools. We've struggled with that. In Connecticut, what's a fair distribution of resources in order to provide a quality education for all our kids? So, if you were elected for a representative from towns such as those, how would you view their obligation and sort of the obligations of the state as a whole to distribute funding to help some of the more struggling urban districts?
So on the, specifically on the education side, so we have great schools in our district. It's one of the things that makes our district really attractive to families. We have a growing percentage of families in our district that are also in the Alice population. What we need to do is we need to look at how we can help our school districts in terms of unfunded mandates that are pushed back, because specifically the school districts in the 23rd, we're not getting a large percentage back through the educational cost sharing formula at the moment. But at the same time, we have to look at the inequity in the structure. And if we have Old Saybrook or Old Lyme, for example, that have a great school district, and then the town next to us has a struggling school district, that's not going to move Connecticut forward if we have great inequity between the quality of education. So we need to look at both what we can do to reduce some of the unfunded mandates that are impacting the way that school districts are able to work within their budgets, but also look at how we can really provide quality education for everybody here in the state.
Politics running to replace an incumbent's sort of a different job application mode. So usually with a job, there's an opening, and you'll say the other guy. You're saying I'm the guy, and you should get rid of that other guy who's now got the job. Why should voters think about getting rid of the other guy? Well,
because what we've been having hasn't been working. My opponent has been up there in Hartford for the last 4 years. He's been part of the decisions that have been made for the last 4 years, and we really need to have people that have a different level of experience, different perspective, I think, is really important. So many people in Hartford are career politicians and lawyers, or people that are comfortable enough financially to, basically get a part-time salary for a full-time job. I have 15 years of nonprofit experience working with a variety of organizations throughout the community, the Middlesex United Way, the Community Foundation of Middlesex County. I have about 12 years of executive leadership experience. I ran a nonprofit organization during the recession. I needed to deliver service, make really difficult decisions as we had constant revenue reductions, and figure out how not to lay off a staff. And so I think we need people that have actual experience, have actually had to sit down and be part of a union negotiation. I had the opportunity to be part of a team that went to New York City to negotiate the 4-year contract between Actors Equity Association and the state university colleges throughout the country. So we need people with real-world experience that are going to be able to reach across the aisle, that are going to be willing to be nonpartisan, to collaborate, to communicate, and really get Connecticut going in the right direction.
Kim, you got anything else you'd like to ask?
I'll just mention that I know there was a while ago well, sort of a while ago now, but there was a big controversy over a rail line coming into through a line and everything. Do you think that's past the town now, or is there anything that the town should be doing to kind of protect from any of those kind of like federal projects?
Well, I think that we need to be in constant conversation because the Northeast Corridor is such an important part of our regional rail, and if we want to improve that, then there's going to be continued conversation over what is the best way to do that. And the old Lime Old Saybrook area at the bottom of the Connecticut River, I mean, that is one of the 50 most beautiful places in the United States. So we have an environmental and economic reason to work to maintain that. But at the same time, we know that having improved transportation infrastructure could be a key component in a growing economic environment here in the southeast corner of the state. So we have to be in constant conversation with our municipalities, with our state leaders, and also with our federal leaders, and with, the rail and other future transportation, options to figure out what the best way to do things are. We can't, I'm not saying that we need to necessarily do A or B, but it needs to be constant conversation because we need to be future focused.
Anything you want to say to wrap up that we didn't cover? Those are the questions we wanted to get to.
No, that was a lot of the things that I've had the opportunity to sit down and talk with people. Like you said, I'm running for office and as the challenger, and so there's not an opening that I'm applying for, but it's been an incredible experience personally doing this, to have the opportunity to have so many conversations with so many people. I've talked to about 1,600 people on their doorsteps and within the community, and to really see where people are is eye-opening. It's really incredible. And right now in our national media, we hear so much about how divided we are in a partisan way that I fully expected I'd be getting thrown off of 1 out of 3 doorsteps. But instead, after talking to 1,600 people, I've had 5 or 6 negative conversations, and it's been, for me personally, something that has made me very hopeful about everybody in Connecticut and their willingness to work together and to move in the right direction, because we're really all talking about the same thing regardless of the party name that we have on ours.
All right, well, and with that, thank you.
Thanks.